Callaway's new and improved Chrome Soft family of golf balls is better for everyone, from amateurs to major winners like John Rahm, Phil Mickelson and Annika Sorenstam. Now with Callaway's proprietary new precision technology, the Chrome Soft family delivers Callaway's highest quality, best performing and most consistent golf balls. To learn more about precision technology and the new and improved Chrome Soft X and Chrome Soft XLS, visit callawaygolf.com.au. Hello and welcome to episode 57 of The Thing About Golf, Golf Australia magazine's ongoing attempt to answer the question, just why do people get hooked on this absurd game? Rod Murray's my name, and alongside my colleague John Huggan, we have the great privilege of bringing you in-depth discussions with people from every imaginable corner of the game to find out just what is the thing about golf for them. On this episode, we're going to peek behind the curtains into the career of a man who's really had two golf careers, first as a player and now as one of the game's best-known voices in commentary. John Huggan joins me now for a quick preview of his chat with New Zealand's Frank Nobilo. Huggy, welcome. We're so familiar with Frank Nobilo for his TV work these days, I think we forget just what a player he was.
Well, it's easily done. I mean, we're talking 20-odd years ago now. He was kind of at his peak in the mid-90s. It seemed like just about every time we turned round, Frank Nobilo was in contention on Sunday afternoon at the major championships. He was incredibly good, incredibly hard golf. I think that was his strength. The harder the course got, the better Frank got.
Yeah, 1994, I forgot, he played in the final group alongside Ernie Els. Now, he didn't have a very good day, and we know that from the leaderboard, but through 3 rounds, he was close enough to lead to be in the final group. So that tells you, I think he finished top 5 at the Masters as well, on at least one occasion. So beautiful lines to Frank's golf swing. Anybody who hasn't had a look at Frank, go to YouTube and look it up. Beautifully orthodox. If you were going to draw a golfer, it would look like Frank Nobilo at setup, would it not?
Yeah, he's one of my favourites long before I knew him. I just loved to watch him play. I mean, he was, kind of like Ernie Els was the same. Ernie Els attracts people just because of the rhythm and the beauty of his swing. And Frank was like that too. I mean, beautiful golfer. And as you say, just so I don't know what orthodox means these days. Frank was orthodox, if we can call it that, in the classic sense.
Yeah, he was not Matt Wolff.
No, he was not.
Indeed. What he is, he's eloquent, thoughtful, intelligent. These are all the traits we don't get to see enough of from people like Frank on television, don't we? It's a point that you've made more than once, which is a shame in some ways, but we get to hear a lot of that in this interview, don't we?
Yes. I mean, he's I know Frank fairly well now, having got to know him over the years since he stopped playing and became a broadcaster. And he's one of those voices that I'm kind of drawn to him. His voice commands respect, if you like. I mean, it makes sense when Frank speaks about golf. I mean, you never think, oh, hang on, what does he mean by that? It's always very, very clear. And, I'm, as you just touched on there, I'm not the biggest fan of some broadcasters who shall remain nameless, but Frank, on the other hand, is terrific. I mean, I'm if he's talking, I'm listening, put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Well, it's the medium with television, isn't it? They're kind of not there to talk about the bigger issues around the game. It's why podcasts have become so popular in golf. What we do get from Frank, at least as well as any other commentator in the game, is fabulous analysis of what's happening on the golf course right in front of him. He's got a great golf mind, doesn't he?
He does, and it is difficult, especially on American television, where it's almost like sound bites. I mean, they're so quick to jump from shot to shot. You don't really get the chance. Didn't get the opportunities that, say, Peter Alice got when he was working for the BBC, where he would get to wax lyrical, if you like, and he was given the time and the space to do that. Frank and his colleagues, I'm not sure they get that chance very often, but Frank makes the most of it, put it that way.
Indeed. Well, let's let the listeners get on it. It's a long one, but a fabulous one. I'm sure you enjoyed it, Huggy. It certainly sounds like it from what we hear, and we get to hear an awful lot of what Frank thinks, and that's to the good of the game. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Frank Nobilo, welcome to the Thing About Golf podcast. The regular listeners will know what I'm about to ask. I always start with the same question: what was the thing about golf for you?
Individual sport more than anything, John. I played a lot of sports when I was a kid growing up. Most kids in New Zealand did. they're obviously exposed to rugby. The All Blacks are so prolific. But my parents were going through a tough time. I needed a game really I could hide in. And golf and tennis were really those two games. Tennis was my first love. And I played with a guy called Mark Lewis, who was Chris Lewis's younger brother. And Chris Lewis actually lost to John McEnroe in the final of Wimbledon. I think it's the biggest loss to this date.
It wasn't close. Yeah.
No, exactly. I think he beat Kevin Curran in the semis or something like that. But Mark was like ahead of him. But he would just drill me on the tennis court, just kill me. But there's three of us basically. A guy called Chris Treen, whose parents played golf, Mark and myself. And my first ever game of golf was when I was 13 at a place called Chamberlain Park. They're trying to close it down now in Auckland. It's a public facility. We ran out of daylight. I played 15 holes, shot 101. I'd actually swung a club a couple of times, but never really played golf. And it was just a game that I really felt like coming from a country so far away, you could just lose, let your imagination go crazy and just play. And I liked the fact that there was so many different facets to it. From driving, where obviously even like today, you could try and hit it as far as you wanted to. And then you had the finesse part of the game, and then obviously the mind. And even the architecture, every hole looked different. So I embraced the challenge. I embraced going out there every day, trying to get a little bit better, because there was, golf, as we all know, even today, it's so frustrating. And I think sometimes you learn more when you're exposed to a game that doesn't have instant gratification.
How soon did it become clear that there was some talent there?
I don't know. I was sort of a big kid. I was 6 foot when I was 16, so I thought I was going to get taller, and I never did. So I was lucky in a lot of the sports that I played. I was a middle distance runner. I had the school record for 800 meters. Couldn't do it now. And so a lot of games I took to quite quickly. So golf was the same thing initially. So by the time I was 16, I was sort of scratch. So in 3 years, but it wasn't until really 2 years later. It was a fluke. I decided to play. I was 17 and I entered the New Zealand Amateur with a friend of mine. His name is Ivan Lediker. He was going to be my foursomes partner. So you had foursomes at the start of the week. They were almost like practice rounds, and then you got into your qualifying rounds. And in the qualifying rounds, I got to play with a guy called Stuart Jones, who was arguably New Zealand's greatest ever amateur. And it was his home course. It was a course called Bridge Par in Hastings. And he said some nice things in the paper, and it's weird, when you're 17 and somebody in the game that you look up to, especially the amateur game, says something that you don't think is worthy at that time. And then the match play started, and I'd win a match and win another match, and then lo and behold, I got to the final, and the final was on my 18th birthday. And I played a guy called Peter Maud, who was a New Zealand international. I remember beating him 10-8 over 36 holes. And Stuart Jones watched 36 holes. And then he sort of some glowing praise. I got to play the Eisenhower that year, which was sadly in Fiji, because Fiji's only a 2-hour flight from Auckland, New Zealand. And I got exposed to Bobby Clampett. He was also 18. I thought I was all right for 18. And I saw him. He was playing with Gary Cowan, and I can't remember the third player. Gary Cowan was the best player in the world, best amateur in the world in those days. And Bobby was so impressive. And that American team had Scott Hoke, Jay Siegel, and John Cook. I mean, it was a really strong side. I think we finished like fourth or so, but it was a chance to see the best amateurs as well. And then, as I said, my parents were going through strife, so I was left with that decision. What do? Do you capitalize on what's happened? Played for New Zealand junior level as well as senior level, and I decided to turn pro when I was 19. And my first tournament, I'll never forget, really, because it was Air New Zealand's first ever crash. It was the Erebus crash in the Antarctic. It was on the eve of the Pro-Am. The event was won by David Graham, but that's how I started and kept going. In those days, you could travel around the world. You still can, but not a lot of people try and go that way now.
Yeah, I mean, everybody I've talked to of your era, if I can put it that way, and I know you were in Europe for a good 10 years or so. Everybody talks with great fondness of the European tour that was the European tour, and how much fun it was, and the camaraderie and all the rest of it. Changed days now, I think, but it's still there to an extent, but not quite what it was. Was that your experience? How much fun did you have when you were jaunting around Europe for a decade or so?
It was the time of my life. Mike Clayton, who's a good friend of both of us. I remember we were traveling around in a Fiat 128. I think there was 5 of us trying to squeeze in with clubs. I mean, you couldn't do it. It's just crazy. You know, it was like a Chevy Chase movie. You could see luggage hanging out the side of the windows and all that as we'd try and traverse around Europe. I remember the first car I could afford was a Ford Capri. And I put that thing on boats and, I drove around on the wrong side of the road, all sorts of things. But you learnt more about yourself. You had to beg, steal, and borrow. Friendships were very important. I remember, like, John Bland was like a mentor to me. And I could spend an hour, 2 hours just telling John Bland stories, really, on number one, how he helped me as a golfer for a start. I would call them Blandisms. And also as an individual. I remember the Irish Open one year. I didn't have that much money, and John Bland, who was a very good player in those days, I had a courtesy car, and there weren't very many of them, remember? So a courtesy car was going to pick him up at the Irish Open and take us to the golf course. So he was going to give me a ride, so I wouldn't have to pay for a taxi, because in those days you went on trains, planes, and automobiles. And Colin Montgomery had just turned pro, so I'd been a pro for a little while, and Monty had got there, and it's not Monty's fault, and he was expecting to get a ride. He'd come from a short stint in college in America, and there was no ride. And so he sees the courtesy car and the courtesy car driver, and he goes, well, I need a ride. And John let him take the car. And I remember, so he said, it's all right, we'll get a taxi. And I remember saying to John, isn't that educating bad behavior? And he said, no, it's not bad behavior. He doesn't know anything other than that. And I think to your point, that's where the tour did start to change, because if you go back 5 or 6, 7 years before that, that's when I first got to Europe. I mean, you paid taxis, you caught train fares, you did everything. And everybody stayed in the same hotels. So even if you had a disagreement with a player on a golf course, and there was many of those, both ways, you sorted it out. You grew up, you're on a bus a lot of the times going to a golf course. Asia was the same. I remember first meeting Billy Ray Brown in the back of a bus in Hong Kong telling stories, so there was a kid growing up in America and a kid growing up in New Zealand, and just fraternizing on the back of a bus telling stories. And humor is different, as you know, in every country. So there's so many things along the line that frame your personality. But yeah, I wouldn't swap that upbringing for anything. It was a time of my life in Europe. Yeah, just making a cut was a big deal. Monday qualifying. And then trying to go to the next event, and on and on. But you got to see places, you got to know what $1 was worth or £1 in those days. It was very important.
It's not become, back then it kind of was the route to America for the ones that were good enough, you included, from Australia and New Zealand. It's less so these days, but it seems to me that, I'll see what you think, that 2 or 3 years at least in Europe is a great grounding for ones who are, on the stepping stones up to something better or bigger, or certainly financially more beneficial. How do you feel about that now? Is it still the way to go, or should you go straight to America the way?
No, I don't think you have to go straight to America. It is about money in the end, because once you turn professional in any sport, people, I hear the phrase growing the game, even in what I do now, but it's not. It's a job, right? So as much as you love the game, you're trying to earn a living, whether it's look after your own family or create a future, whatever the case may be. So one of the advantages that nobody talks about on the PGA Tour, as opposed to Europe, is a pension.
Yeah.
And people are, well, what are you talking about? These players are playing for millions of dollars. I mean, someone needs to go and write an article on the pensions, on what some players will receive. It's a phenomenal program. Europe does not have that luxury. But going back to your question about having to play in Europe or not having to play in Europe now, there wasn't the equivalent of Nike, Buy.com, Korn Ferry, whatever you want to call it now. And for example, like a Jason Day, and you know me, I'm going to go off on tangents as usual. But
that's all right.
A Jason Day was
I like your tangents.
Was lucky enough. He was lucky enough for the Buy.com, I think. Then it touched Australia, so he won a tournament. I think it was at Kooyonga in South Australia, and that consequently led to a start. So his decision to go to Europe was stopped. And it was like, hey, I've got this golden opportunity, and I can sort of maybe shorten the curve if that's really where you want to go. But, I've always thought to be a really good player, your game has to translate. There was a nickname once for Robert Allenby. I mean, he was called by his peers and friends, Guinness, didn't travel well. And he hated that name, and obviously he became a very, very good player around the world. But that was the thing, Europe in my day, if I want to use that era, you had 6 bona fide world number ones. Your Seves, your Faldos, your Langers, your Lals. I'm going to obviously miss out a couple of players there. Woozy. So it's not like you were playing a second tour by any stretch of the imagination. You were playing the world's best players, and they chose to play a lot of events in Europe. I think that part's changed a little bit. Wentworth was a massive tournament. Massive. The Irish Open was huge. I mean, the galleries were only second to the Open Championship. So that's 3 events just there straight away, including the Open. I mean, they were phenomenal to play in. And then you've got other events scattered around Europe that are also very, very good. It's sort of been affected by the PGA Tour from a date point of view. So the European Tour no longer flows easily from week to week to week. It's sort of, there's a really good month like coming up in January or February, and then there's nothing for a little while, even though there's tournaments, because people want to go and play in America, and then we can put a few in around the Open, and then we'll give some, let America go again, and then we'll do some other. So for someone going, developing, they go, well, why would I want to do that? So in some respects, that forces them to go to America.
Yeah, a few years ago, I remember talking to you at Wentworth when you were there commentating, and you lamented the state of affairs back then. Your feeling was that there should be more cooperation between the PGA Tour and what was then the European Tour, now the DP World Tour. That seems to be happening. How do you see that developing? Cynical me fears that the PGA Tour, it's more of a takeover than a merger, but how do you feel about that development?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, John, I think in 20 years it will be a takeover. But in order for golf to continue to fill the coffers of the athlete, they need big sponsors. And you need to pull from Asia, you need to pull from Europe, from the best companies. Let's look at Formula One, what they're doing when you go to various countries that can pay that bill. So I've had this discussion not only with you, but over the last 5 to 10 years, that there will be a world tour of sorts. And I think the best way to have it would be a cooperation of, Europe and America for a start, because you could use the existing tournaments right now on the landscape, the Memorials, the Wentworths, the Irish Opens, what used to be Durrell in those days, the equipment. You can easily garner 30 great events. You don't have to change one iota. And therefore the sponsors are well represented. I don't, whether it's the BMW from a Europe or, a Mercedes type thing, or some of the South Korean sponsors, the Hyundai, the people that have kicked in the money, they deserve to have events scattered around. And it would work well, but your player will be like a tennis player. He will play everywhere. And at the moment, that's the fight, because TV has a big part of that. And at the moment, TV has a massive investment in the PGA Tour, whether it's, Golf Channel, NBC, and obviously who I work with now is CBS and Sky. So there's big dollars there that they just simply want to keep there and not necessarily scatter around. And Europe's always struggled with its TV dollar because of the sort of splintered country situation.
I mean, the strategic partnership, or whatever they call it, it seems it did sort of come out a backwards way in that the Saudi development that is the talk of the town at the moment. I know that the European Tour had an offer from the Saudis and used that as leverage. They went to the PGA Tour and said, look what we've got here. And the PGA Tour then said, okay, we need to get involved to stop the European Tour sloping off with the Saudi money. Where do you see all that happening? I know it's all, you said crystal ball a minute ago, and this is definitely crystal ball stuff, because nobody really knows where this is all headed. But how do you view it from your perspective? Yeah,
it's a great question. No idea is a bad idea, right? So at the moment, it's, I've read, we would have read the same stuff, the Bonesaw Classic and whatever, and whatever clever things that can be written about it. But, you go back, for example, Saudi, it used to be a protectorate of Britain for a start. And then on the other hand, I think it outlawed slavery in 1972. So it's a relatively new country. I remember going to the London School of Economics where our daughter went to school, and there's Nelson Mandela made a speech there. It's up on the walls. And I'm paraphrasing, but effectively he said, our country is 150 yards behind. Do not judge it the way you judge yours. And I know you think, well, what's that got to do with Saudi Arabia? Is that, it was an ally through Afghanistan. I mean, America was quite happy to use it to launch planes and all sorts of things. So there's an element of convenience when we have these discussions. So I go into it saying, okay, no idea is a bad idea. Why is it being touted about now? Well, obviously it's about money and designing golf courses. That's a big thing there. And then it's like, why, which players in particular are really keen on it? And I would imagine that's 40 and above. In other words, you're not necessarily competitive. So, the answer is going to be money. But is there anything that you really could pull out of that? And I was doing an interview just recently, and the analogy I gave was, if it was like a Moscow circus, as a kid growing up, I wouldn't have seen the circus if the Moscow circus didn't come to New Zealand. So if it was 40 and above, and it really did travel around the world, and you got to see players that 5 minutes ago were some of the best in the world, then I think it's a good idea. If it's a competition just purely to the PGA and the European Tour, then I think it's definitely a bad idea, because I think it's literally trying to own golf. There's a lot of things I disagree with on the PGA Tour, but there's a lot of things I think they get right, and I would say the same for Europe, because I had 10 or 15 really good years there, and it's, to quote an Ayrton Sennerism, who used to say pure driving. I think it's pure golf, and we've still got to go as close to possible. You and I have talked about the rules in golf. Like the fact of just trying to pull a driver back from 48 to 46 when nobody's really using it. Yeah. I mean, it's honestly the selfish interest in that. And golf courses are going crazy. Like I said, I'll go off on a tangent, but, we got to be careful in that and go, we've still got to keep golf where it should be as this great sport. It's not about fun. It's not necessarily about growing the game. It's allowing people to have access to it. We have black marks on our game. It's an elitist game. Volleyball, for example, has twice the rating as what golf does. Volleyball. Nobody talks about that. I'm not talking about cricket or soccer or whatever, volleyball worldwide. And so we got to look at our sport really differently. One thing we are very fortunate. We have a very good demographic. So once again, it comes back to money. And I think if we play with that demographic and make it only about money, then we have a particular problem. And I think that's where the Saudi thing has come about. It's almost like, well, we can buy this game. Yeah, and I think some of the manufacturers have done that. Let's buy 30 yards.
Plus, we're all, ultimately we're all hypocrites in some way, shape, or form in this. I mean, you can look at it, if you want to slightly wryly, I think, is to look at the Saudi money as basically they're giving us our money back, all the money that we've given them for the oil. Yeah. It's just our own money. They're spending our money, really. Well,
and throw in Venezuela. America gets more oil, as much oil from Venezuela. I mean, that's hardly a paradise. So, yeah, we're very quick to just turn the eye on that, or issues in South Africa, the Aborigine in Australia. I mean, Maoris in New Zealand. It's the list goes on. So even we play in Germany, we play in Japan. I mean, my dad sadly passed away this year. He would never buy a Japanese car up until 15 years ago. So we change and we have to evolve, but it doesn't mean we have to conveniently head down the wrong direction and just say all's well that ends well. So no idea is a bad idea. If it was, like I said, a Moscow type circus thing, and it really did go around, like as a kid, if I got to see, and I did, Jack Nicklaus actually played at Chamberlain Park, as did Arnold Palmer. Now they played like an exhibition type match. They wouldn't have come to New Zealand any other way. They didn't do it just for the hunting and the fishing, Tiger Woods did the same thing. He played in Wellington, and that was great for the Danny Lees growing up. Mm. So there is some good that can be done, but as an opposition to the PGA and the European Tour, I would vote no.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Tiger playing in the New Zealand Open, I was there that week. It was the easiest week I've ever had as a journalist. I mean, the stories just kept coming. Some of it was absolutely hilarious. What was going on? I mean, it was quite a week. My favourite moment though remains. Greg Turner jogging out to the tee where he was going to start in the Pro-Am and being rugby tackled by one of the security guards who thought he was chasing after Tiger for some reason. It was a great moment.
They didn't know how to handle it, yeah.
And there was a golf cart being driven around by another two of these security guards with supposedly golf clubs sticking out the back, and one of them was a rifle. It was wonderful stuff.
Yeah, classic.
Did you actually play in that tournament?
You know, I was
because that would be about the time you were finishing, was it not?
Yeah, the last New Zealand Open I played actually was in Auckland in 2002. So I think the answer is no, because I didn't play. That was normally opposite like the World Cup.
Yeah.
So I think the answer is no.
We need to touch on that. I think not everybody out there will know. Well, they'll have some idea of what a good player you were, but no idea as to why you stopped when you did. Can you give us? I know it's probably a painful story for you, but can you give us a summary of how that came to pass?
You want everybody to know why I'm bitter and twisted?
Well, that's why we're friends, Frank.
Fair comment. Yeah, I got diagnosed in 1996. Well, I actually had what I consider my best year. I think I had top tens in all four majors in 1996. And because of that, too, I had access to a PGA Tour card. And I'd also won that year the European Tournament Players Championship in Germany. So I had a 5-year exemption. So it was almost a no-brainer. So I went over for my rookie year in 1997, and just after the Honda, which was in slightly south of West Palm, I forget the exact. I think it was Eagle something was the name of the golf course. They don't use it anymore. And I remember going to the fitness trailer, and I couldn't put my watch on. So there's a guy called Ralph Simpson who was used to train the Olympians, and then the PGA Tour brought him up. Really good physio. And I'd got to know him by the frequent times I'd gone and played in America. He was always at the big events. And he goes, "Man, what's up?" I'm like, "I don't know." And so, my both wrists had blown up. He said, "You should see about that." And they were painful as hell. So I pulled out. And then I was with IMG, and I said, "Hey, I got a problem." So my wife and I, Selena and I, we flew to Rochester, Minnesota, the Mayo Clinic there. And I spent 3 days there. Oddly enough, I think that's also where Olazabal was misdiagnosed.
Yes.
Initially with his foot problem, which is sad. What a hell of a player he was. And yeah, that's another story. But so I spent 3 days there, and they said, "You've got inflammatory polyarthritis," poly meaning both sides. And I had it in both wrists, both elbows, and both shoulders. So for a golfer, that wasn't much fun. And Scotsman was the head surgeon that I was seeing, Dr. Ian Hay. You might know him. He's often at the RNA and all that.
Yeah.
So he prescribed some medication so I could get back into playing, because I'd finished fourth at Augusta the year before, so I desperately wanted to go back. And I was on a drug called Imuran, which is an immune suppressant, Plaquenil, which is like a mild form of chemotherapy, and prednisone, which is like a wonder drug. And me being me, 36 years of age, I didn't research any of the side effects. I'm like, hey, it's fine. I mean, the pain's starting to go. I can play. And then I managed to win Greensboro. I think I won the Mexican Open and Hong Kong that year, but that's the last time I ever did anything of sort of note. I had 3 wins. I actually broke the money record my rookie year. They wouldn't give it to me because I'd played more than 10 tournaments previously on the PGA Tour or something. That was the Vijay Singh rule. They changed the rules, so I couldn't get it, and they gave it to Stuart Sink instead.
Not that you're bitter, obviously.
Bitter about that. Yeah, not that I remember that. So I always remember the first year that Stuart Sink got on tour, 1997. And it got worse, and then I tried to keep playing for a little while. I hung around there. I think I'm still actually on a major medical back in 2001.
Right, okay. There's still a prospect of you coming back, is there?
Yeah, I'm going to do a comeback, yeah. But once again, that's where I go back to players like John Bland, where they early on they tell you, you shoot 80 or whatever it is, or double bogey the last to cost you a tournament. It's not everything. And at the time, it really was, and I felt cheated. I felt someone had stolen something from me. I'd wake up in the morning. I'd have to get up at ridiculous hours in the morning, just walk on a treadmill just to get my the bones sort of moving, then go to the fitness trailer. travel with hot wax, all sorts of things to try and warm up the joints and play and keep taking the pills and that. And then I did start researching the side effects due to I had a dermatological appointment. A friend of mine, it was actually a good friend of Payne Stewart's, Dr. Gutierrez. And he goes, hey, I just got to ask you what you're taking. I told him the 3 drugs. He said, man, you got to be careful. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I just tore my hamstring at the Tournament of Champions. And he goes, oh, well, the side effects. I'm like, what? So then I went back, researched it, and I realized that, I had 2 choices, either to keep playing golf and like that and probably, shorten my life or try and look for something else. And so I started to wane a little bit. My golf I think I drove my wife crazy. She saw that I was more miserable than normal. And then it was tough trying to wind it down. It really was, because I never ever thought of a plan B. And I always said that to people in pro-ams. They'd say, oh, what are you going to do after golf? And then I always said, if I knew the answer to that question, I still believe it to be true, then I shouldn't be out here playing golf, because you need to be fully committed. Yeah. And I still say the same with young players today. When I chat to them, I said, if you worry about next week, next month or whatever, that's the motor racing driver attitude, which is also one of the sports that I love, is that you cannot be thinking about crashing. You cannot be thinking about the next race. It's like right here and now. And that's the way it is. But when you stop, you think like a normal person. And it was a tough adjustment.
How do you feel about it now? I mean, we'll get back to the near things you had in 2 or 3 majors, but I mean, has time given you a different perspective on not being able to play, or is it still a frustration? It must be, I would imagine.
No, I'm actually over it now, to be honest. I don't play. I haven't played for several years now, but my wife could probably answer the question better than I could, to be honest, because she had to put up with it. But being involved in golf and getting a job in TV, which I was never cut out for that. It was never on my radar. But what that did, unbeknown to me, was involve me in a game. And then after I'll be honest, it took 6-7 years. I started to realize, I thought, hang on a minute, golf actually treated me well. I did all right. Didn't do what I wanted, but I did all right. And then I've been gifted a job, really, that I didn't have. I wouldn't have had the qualifications for much else. And I'm still involved in this game. So I started to see the game from a different perspective. And we have a foundation that's 19 years old now. You try and affect younger kids. So there's an obligation to say, well, hang on, you've actually done all right. It's still a great game. Doesn't matter that you don't play it. But for everybody else that's playing. So I started to look at it from a different prism, and I still think it's a phenomenal game. It's a great game. I love the way the guys play. I don't like the equipment necessarily.
We'll get to that, Frank. Don't you worry.
But, But I don't like the fact that they're gifted. But I love the commitment of a lot of the players, because that hasn't changed. So when there's that sort of purity that they really just want to go out and be better tomorrow than what they were today, I love that. There's an innocence in that, and that part hasn't gone. So I started to see it differently, and now I'm okay with it. That ship is well sailed, and I try and occupy my time and other things. I try and be a better broadcaster now, and realize that I was given a second chance, so maybe use this similar commitment into that.
Well, I'm going to a little twist on that same question that I just asked you. There was a period in the mid-90s, early mid-90s, where it seemed like every time I looked up, you were on the leaderboard at a major championship. Are there moments, shots, holes that you look back on and you think, well, I'd like to play that one again? Everybody's got them.
Yeah, fleetingly. I try not to indulge too much, but I remember playing in the last group with Ernie at the US Open in 1994. And I started 2 back. But to be honest, I don't like to admit it, but when I was in the locker room, I didn't think I had a chance to win. I know, I had won tournaments from there, but it was my first ever US Open. It was actually Ken Schofield that got us in. Up until then, they only used to take, I think it was the top 2 on the money list. Ken extended that to top 15, and Ken was there, and he goes, thanks. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm about to play my last round, sort of thing. He said, it's validated what we were trying to do. Yeah. So, that's also why, my wife grew up in England, and my daughter, she lives there now, and so it's still part of who I am. So I was proud to help that part along. But when I was getting ready for that final round, I just didn't see my name on the top of the leaderboard. So that was a mistake, only through inexperience. It still finished top 10, but it gave me a chance to at least believe then after that, because, in retrospect, you look back at some of the shots, maybe, why did you do this? Plus, I saw the guy that won, albeit in a playoff with Lauren Roberts and Monty. But the following year, we go back to where Steve Jones won. God, am I going? Oakland Hills. Oakland
96,
Hills. Yep. 95 was Shinnecock, sorry. Yeah, Shinnecock. I played with the guy that should have won, which was Davis Love. Davis had about a 2.5 footer on 16, the par 5, to tie the lead. And then he finished like bogey, double bogey. We finished on the same score, like 7th or 8th. So I played good in back-to-back US Opens, and I felt like I'd seen two guys really, one guy did win it, and the other guy that really should have. And as good a player as Davis was, I'm like, okay, so people make mistakes. And then the following year, really to sort of answer your question, was Oakland Hills. And that's when I had my best chance. I remember I actually saw Camilo Villegas hit a sand iron into this hole, but I remember hitting a driving 3-iron into, I think it was 15, long par 4. And I flushed this 3-iron, and 2 putts I would have tied. And I 3-putted, and it was 14. 15 is 15. Yeah, it's 14. 15 is a dogleg left par 4. And it's nearly drivable, and I had a go at it with a driver and hit it in the tree and, made double and, whatever. And that was the one where I felt like I actually had the best chance, and my game was ready and whatever. When I finished 4th Masters in '96, that was Greg Norman and Nick Faldo. So I was a supporting cast. Yeah.
I mean, you touched.
It was fun. It was good to see your name up on the leaderboard.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, it seemed like you were there constantly in that period. But you touched on an interesting point that I bang on about sometimes. Schofield's influence in getting the leading, not the leading Europeans, but the kind of half a rung down guys into the major championships, which I always kind of roll my eyes a little bit when people use major championships as the sole measure of greatness, if you like. I mean, it's only a fairly recent thing that the world has gotten to play. I mean, the 3 of them in America every year. Most players like Sam Torrance, Mark James, Howard Clark, Ken Brown, those guys, they only got to play in one every year. And, I mean, Seve played in the Masters in 1980 when he won the Masters, and because he finished in the top 1 in the Open the year before. The guys who were runners-up to Seve at Lytham didn't necessarily get to play in the Masters. So it's only a recent thing that the Masters, the majors, to me, are actually a great measure of an equal measure, if you like, of players across the planet. It wasn't always the case, and fairly recently as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. It wasn't. The biggest influence really was the world rankings, and we can disagree with those. But in 1986, when they started, at least there was a balance of power. There was another avenue to get in. So, because if you're an Australasian player, and there were a lot of good players from Australasia, more Australia than New Zealand, then they also created avenues. And then you started to see that success, whether it was the David Grahams, the Normans, the Devlins, the Nagels. Obviously, Peter Thompson was the champion of that course because, what Tomo did, and he really didn't play that much. And then South Africa had its Bobby Locks, and then Gary Player, and on it went with the next generation. But back to Ken, Ken was a visionary. He rubbed some people up the wrong way, but he was trying to champion the course of the players. And Ken was also instrumental in the Ryder Cup, with Tony Jacklin. He pleaded to get Jacklin as a captain. And also they had a plea to get Seve on the side. And then, I've talked a lot with Nick Faldo over that particular period of time. Nick actually couldn't get into a lot of those US Opens.
Yeah.
I mean, his game was built for a US Open. You're right, he was denied. So while people have gone back in retrospect and talked about the majors in the 50s and the 40s and the 60s and all that, there's very much, like tennis, there's the modern era and the open era,
Yeah, I mean, it's
a shame, really. It's a shame.
Huge American bias if you look at the all-time list. There's certainly a bias towards the Scots at the beginning, but that soon changed. I mean, before even the 70s, it was totally dominated by Americans because, the Neil Coles and Peter Alice, they hardly ever got to play. They got one major a year, and that was it.
And on top of that, too, you had a ball that it was a different ball.
Yeah.
So, So you had to go across and play in 3 majors when I grew up, I played the small ball. And so it was a big change for a lot of that. So why would you? Why would you go across, despite how big the tournament was, and completely have to change your equipment?
Yeah, that always makes me laugh when people bang on about the rolling back the ball. Well, we've already had a roll back of the ball everywhere in the world except in America. I lost about 20 yards back in the early 80s when you had to switch from the small ball to the big ball, and I'm sure you were the same.
No, exactly. And that's where you get these convenient arguments that people will say what happened 3 seconds ago was so much more important and is factual. And I'm like, yeah, but it has no bearing on really the direction we're going. And it is a shame. There's a multitude of that, where equipment change. I remember talking to Gene Sarazen. I was lucky enough to win his event, the Sarazen World Open, back-to-back in 95, 96, I think it was. And he gave me a replica of his forward, which he holed out, for his Albatross 15 at Augusta. But I got to go back by virtue of playing well in his tournament. And that was actually meant to be a World Golf Championship event. But through the stroke of a pen, that was denied, and then Panos put his money into motor racing. But there was a dinner. You get to sit there, and there was Jack Nicklaus Payne. There was a lot of good players that were there, and you get to sit around the round table with the squire. And he was telling me about the sand iron when he was trying to decipher, for want of a better word, a way out of these pot bunkers that he was going to play in the Open Championship. So he came across the sand iron. So he would put the club in upside down so the grip end was sticking out so nobody could see what he had in his bag. And he never got $1 for that club, by the way, or the forward. He got a lifetime contract with Wilson, but 0 royalties. So, there's always been tweaks along the way, but not massive shifts. And people will say, yeah, the golf ball's changed, but but when's enough? It's when you reduce a golf course to nothingness, then it's no longer the game. Power is a huge part of the game and should always be, but power is relative. It's relative to the people you're playing against as well as the golf course. And if both are relegated to nothing, then it's pointless.
Yeah. Well, I always lament the demise of some wonderful golf courses. The one I always go back to, there's a perfect example is one that you'll have played many times in your time in Europe, was Sunningdale. I mean, if there are 10 better courses in the world, the old I'm talking about really, and it's now obsolete, or it's defined as obsolete for guys at the highest level. I mean, what other game would allow that to happen? It's madness.
Yeah, I remember playing with Seve there, and he hit a 3-wood out of it's the last par 5 on the back 9, because it's par 70 there. And he was battling to make the cut. Now, it sounds like a bad Seve story when you say he's battling to make the cut. An amazing player and just wonderful to play alongside, fun and all that. But I couldn't have got a 7-iron over this lip. And I know people think I'm exaggerating. He hit a 3-wood because he was on the cut line. He might have been one out. So he's fighting. And he must have hit this thing in those days, 230 yards, which is a hit. But to get it up that quick and over the lip, that I promise you would have been my best 7-iron to get it over there. And get it on the front to try and make 4 to get it back on the cut line. And then drove it under the lip of a bunker on 18. And I remember all he could do was flop it out. And now he'd made another bogey. And he must have paced 100 yards. And walked back, got it to 10 feet and made it. And he finished up missing the cut by a shot. But I'll never forget thanking him. I said, thank you for the lesson. I mean, that's guts, fortitude. That's how the game's meant to be played. It's not about just smashing a driver and flipping it on from one side to the other. I mean, that's always a reward, but not a reward on every single hole. Think of the fun, if you want to say fun, that you're actually missing out on really what the game's about. It's meant to be a challenge, all I've heard over even my playing days was, if they grew rough in here, if they did this, if they could make this hole 30 yards longer. If they did that on every sport, you imagine if all of a sudden Ronaldo starts kicking a few more goals. Well, let's make the soccer pitch, make it 10 yards longer. Yes. Let's make the rugby pitch. I mean, you couldn't do it because of the stadiums. But we've done that in golf. They don't do it in tennis. That's why tennis, believe it or not, the longest a racket can be is 29 inches. Just about every player uses a 27-inch racket, right? The one guy, Diego Schwartzman, uses 28. But the reason why they're not close to the maximum is because they've limited the size of the court. So you can, and also they tweak the ball as well. But if they kept doing what golf did, which was let's make the court bigger and bigger and bigger, they would have the same problems. People would be pushing the envelope because I need a bigger, faster serve. And every time we add on 50, 60, 100 yards to a golf course, it opens the door to make a driver go longer and further because that's the only part we're doing. We haven't changed any other part of the golf course. We've added 30 yards on, so give me 30 more yards. So we've done nothing.
Well, it always amazes me, and I'm sure you've probably heard me say this because I've said it many times, but I've never understood why golf is the only game that has protected the equipment at the expense of the venues, whereas every other sport fixes the venue to protect the equipment. You know, the other way around. I mean, it's just none of it makes any sense. You know, they fix the equipment so that the venues work, and golf's done the opposite. It's weird.
Well, yeah, hey, it's a bit like we're talking about whether it's Saudi, and that's about money. It always has been. I mean, look what's been banned this year, green books. And I know I don't like visually when I do my job on TV the time it takes, but you have a slow play rule, right? Which often isn't imposed 40 seconds for the second person to play. If a guy wants to get it out and doing that and take and legitimately take 40 seconds, I'm fine with that. But there's like two people out on tour that do the green books. So yeah, don't get me wrong, they make a good living. But they're hardly making the money rangefinders make.
Yeah.
And all that, you know. And, you know, Dean Beeman and Jack Nicklaus started the whole yardage thing when they'd pace it off and it'd be on a scorecard. So Peter Thompson used to take lines on his little notebook at St. Andrews and say, this, if the wind's coming from the right, you aim at this tower and, you know, that steeple and whatever. So people have always tried to take notes. I kind of like the Bryson DeChambeau in the sense that he's exposed this. In a weird way. So I applaud the fact that it's no longer under the radar. It's come across like, let's get Bryson, because Bryson's gone for the long driving thing, which really is impressive. Don't get me wrong. Some of the things he's done are quite amazing to be able to morph from a player to just a pure long hitter. But, you know, when he had the compass out and they said, no, you can't do that. And he's, you know, the level, all these things, at least he's exposed it and we go, oh my God, how did this happen? Well, people have been doing it for yonks. Yeah. And finally it's like, and he's got the blame for it all, but it's like, everybody's like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll take this. I'll do that. You know, 43.5-inch drivers have snuck out to 45, 46. And then Phil, you know, when Phil says, oh, well, what about tall players? You know, like, what about 7-footers? We're going to keep them out of the game. So what? A 7-footer's only going to play with a driver? What is he going to do with the other 13 clubs in the bag? They're obviously going to be too short. So I mean, there's some crazy arguments being thrown about. So there's no one's using any logic or actually being truthful about it. It's like, let's drop a big smoke bomb and hopefully no one will really see what's going on. And I really do. Hey, the RNA and the USGA, have they made mistakes? Yeah, they have. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, nobody wants to give them the time of day to just let them help this along. Everybody's making it. It's a bit like Massey in Formula One in the weekend. They're trying to make their job as hard as possible, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I was going to get to this later on, but we're kind of into the subject. I know that they have to be worried about the old course next year at the Open. If we get some decent weather, which unbelievably can happen in Scotland, here in Scotland. If we get a flat, calm week, I mean, I can see multiple scores in the high 50s happening. And two ways of looking at that. One, it appalls me that would happen. On the other hand, the anarchist in me thinks, well, just let it happen, and maybe that's the tipping point for something that has been long overdue, will happen because of that. The old course, the kind of ultimate monument to all that's good in the game, being shamed like that. I don't know how you feel. That's obviously how I feel about it, but where are you coming from on that subject?
Yeah, I have lost sleep on that, and I have an affinity with the old course because when I turned pro, they started an event called the Dunhill Cup, which was a team event. And by virtue of coming from a small country, I got to play. And I think I played in more Dunhill Cups than anybody else because I could represent New Zealand every year. I paid for my first house, but I got to play the old course every single year. And I think I also got to play 2 Open Championships there. So I got to see it, admittedly, different time of the year in October, as what it is the Open in July. But I got to see it play differently every single day.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I ever went there, which was 1984. And like everybody, and I've read about it too, you're underwhelmed when you first go around. You're like, all this for this? And then, I can see at the end why the Bobby Joneses and the Nicholases say, if I can only ever play one golf course, because there's a beauty about it. And it really is a joy to play in the sense that you get so many different types of shots, providing you get to play them. I remember playing Curtis Strange that very year. And, like the double greens, they all add up to 18. And I'd got it out. I was like 1 under, and Curtis was the best player in the world, mid-80s there for a while. And I'm like 1 or 2 ahead of Curtis Strange. I'm giving this look like I'm a 24-year-old kid from New Zealand. Like, hey, I thought he was good. I gave him like one of those looks. And then Curtis, who's a good friend today, he gave me one of those Curtis looks back. And we're still sort of fairly close when we go to 13. The par 4, and it's got the fifth hole, which is the enormous green on the par 5 they share. And so the flag on the fifth was on the extreme left for that hole, which made it, you could almost mistake it the center on 13, and the flag was actually way right. So I see Curtis here, and he's like drawn level, and he's got I love the look, the angry Curtis look. He's a good man.
Yeah.
And He just pipes. It would have been like a 6-iron. He just pipes it. You can see him half run up the hill because he knows he's flushed it, and it's going straight down this flag. But I'm looking at it. I was like 20 yards further up, and I'm like, that's 40 yards left of the flag.
Yeah.
So I sort of look at him like that, and I innocently, and I should never have done it. I go, wrong flag. Now, I can't say on this what he said back.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think I made 8 at on the hell hole, and he completely buzzsawed me coming in. But it started a friendship. But yeah, I mean, the place played different every single day, every single year. And it's a shame when you're right, this generation or people going forward are going to say, oh, that's just a drive and a chip course. And they will never, like when Seve and Tom Watson, that great Open Championship in 1984, when you look at Watson group behind, Seve trying to make his 4 at 17, and then Watson hits it over the back on the road, not out of bounds, and, then the great putt on 18. Simon Owen finishing, second, Simon Owen, a New Zealander, finishing second to Jack Nicklaus in 1978. There was like, there's so many great memories of some of the shots that they had to hit coming down into the breeze. So yeah, it'd be a travesty. I just hope that if you say the anarchist in you wants to sort of blow up, I hope we don't get a Lance Armstrong-like moment where we sort of have to say, well, hang on a minute, something's gone completely wrong, and there's a period of time in golf we say that really didn't count. That's the way I look at it. I don't want us to reach that point. I feel that we're eerily close.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people always ask me, well, where would you go back to? And my answer is always, you go back to the point where they really started messing around with the old course. I mean, I wrote an Open, the first Open where they had the new tees at Peter Dawson wasn't too happy with me when I pointed out that this was the first Open Championship that was being played on 5 golf courses at the same time. There was tees. The one tee was on the Himalayas putting course. There was a tee on the 9th tee was on the new course. The 14th tee was on the Jubilee. Obviously, they're playing the old course, and if you count the 17th tee, which is over the fence on the driving range,
out of bounds.
Yeah, exactly. And they're now growing rough in places where there shouldn't be any rough, hardly any rough at all on the old course, but there's now rough all over the place. To the point where on the 16th hole, the Principal's Nose bunkers, the rough to the left of that is within a few yards now of the Principal's Nose bunkers. So everybody's going to play the same shot left and play from there. There's no incentive to risk too much. Everybody will play the holes the same way, which is the ultimate damnation of the old course, because as you just said, it's different every day, or should be, and it's in many places now it's going to be the same for everybody.
Yeah, and the beauty of playing St Andrews, you could play the safe line, which was down the left on every hole, but it gave you the hardest second shot. And then all the pot bunkers that are sort of scattered, especially on 2 and 3 down the right side. That was the beauty of that, of also having to sort of feel where the trouble was. And even going back to 2000, where Woods was he was so overcome with how much ball control he had. The fact that I don't think he hit a single fairway bunker, right?
No, well, he flew them all. That's why.
Yeah, but it was, for him, it was like he'd controlled the tee ball. Up until then, he was known more for a longer, and that's when we started to see a Woods that was just on a different planet, because strategically, he just went up a complete notch. And then Hoylake was a different way of attacking a golf course, and we started to see the best golf that I'd ever seen in my life.
Pebble Beach, I think, was the best for me at 2000 when he won there. Yeah.
And that's, I remember writing an article. I tried the odd time to write an article, and I couldn't put up with the abuse afterwards, because I remember saying the only time you could say that Tiger Woods. Yeah, exactly. That's why I don't do it. The only time that Tiger Woods might have had an equipment advantage was around 2000, because the Nick Prices had gone to the solid ball. He was using a precept. Mm-hmm. And then Mark O'Meara in 1988 had done well, obviously winning the Open and the Masters, which is the precept, the Bridgestone. And then Woods, through his friendship with O'Meara at the time, because living at Isleworth, was basically, let me hit that ball. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute, it goes further, it goes straighter, it doesn't curve. And then he got the jump. Up until then, that ball had been around for a long while, and nobody had really, doesn't matter. Nick Price, great player, didn't change the field. Woods had it, and 18 months later, everybody was using it, using the equivalent anyway. So you could argue that's the only time, but driver, he never went for the 48-inch driver, never went for the 64-degree wedge. It was just plain golf, played on a different level.
Do you think anything's ever going to happen? I mean, I remember you telling me about a players' dinner at the Masters in the early 90s where everybody kind of all the players rounded on the officials and told them something needs to be done. Well, we're a quarter of a century on and more, and nothing's really happened of substance anyway. Do you think anything is ever going to happen on that front?
Yeah, I do. I'm still hopeful. I think, once you give up, then hey, you might as well jump out of the game, whatever capacity you're in. It's interesting you mention Augusta, because whether they like it or not, I think they hold some of the keys. And oddly enough, it's through amateur events, because honestly, they deserve kudos for. And you're going to think just because it's in my neck of the woods, the Asia Pacific Amateur Championship. I just did that a month or two ago in Dubai. Yep, exactly. And also they've done the Latin Amateur Championship. And you're going to say, well, okay, so what? It's two events, right? But it's the people that are involved, because the Asia Pacific one is a deal basically is brokered between Augusta National and the RNA. Right. Yeah. So it's a collusion to try and say, okay, what can we do to help here? And then the Latin Americas with the USGA and the PGA of America. So you're now starting to get people in the same room, and you get the PGA Tour on board and the European Tour. Then all of a sudden that conversation could be held. I like the way Rory McIlroy is stood up and said, look, we don't need 48. He's saying we don't need those 2 inches. And sometimes we put too much pressure on Rory's shoulders. I love what he says 85, 90% of the time. Sadly, I don't think he should have to have that role all the time. But I applaud the fact that I think, like I said, generally his heart's in the right place. I mean, you're going to see a Tiger Woods probably do the same thing that Jack Nicklaus did, which is wait till his career's over to really start to use some influence. And I know that's eerily close. Jack, when he played, was, it's not his fault. He was just trying to be the best player he could. He wanted the best equipment. In those days, too, handmade woods and compression-tested golf balls. If they went through his dozen or whatever and they checked them all, it was an advantage. I know Tom Weiskopf couldn't always get the same equipment Jack Nicklaus did. You'd only get a couple of sets. So it was different. Whereas nowadays, the good side is a 16-year-old amateur, doesn't matter where they're from, male or female, left or right-handed, can get the same equipment as the best players on the PGA Tour, with the exception of the driver, because the driver costs money. The driver, if you really, I was telling a friend of mine, he was looking for a driver, and I'm like, I know you can go and get tested. It's going to cost you like $400, 300 euros. But I said, you're only going to test on one day. These guys are basically testing 3-4 times a week, really. And if you want to say their launch monitors are behind them, so they can fine tune it like an F1 car. So they're getting a benefit that really they don't need. If it's designed for the average amateur, then it should be easier for them to get the reward, not the best players in the world. So basically what we're doing is
You can sum up the whole thing with that, what you just said, is that the top players are using equipment that was designed for the handicap amateur.
Yeah, and it's also changed the game because, the ball that doesn't spin or spin sideways as much, that was designed to keep it in play. And there are some positive things, the wider sweet spots, the more forgiving head. I know people have talked about trying to reduce the size. I mean, there's some things where the ship has probably sailed, but just giving people yardage, I could bore you with the mathematics on it, but, basically for every quarter of an inch extra on a robot, you should get 1 more mile an hour of clubhead speed. And for every 1 mile an hour of clubhead speed, you effectively can get, potentially 2.5 yards. So you start adding a couple of inches and you can see, you're adding 8 mile an hour. Now all of a sudden you're adding 20 yards. So, but if everybody on the tour is doing that, well, then really just taking it away, then everybody's in the same boat, right?
Well,
so that's why I don't.
I always feel sorry for the truly talented ones at the top end of the game. Now, Rory's the perfect example. Is that he's the best driver in the game. Let's say if he's not, he's damn close. But he doesn't get the benefit from his talent that he should get or did get or would have gotten back in the day. I mean, that to me is the biggest problem. And when I bang on about this, I've had players say to me, "Well, we're just as good as and if not better than our predecessors." And I said, well, yeah, you might be. And I think it's a very good case that you are, but you never get the chance to show it because you don't play the same game anymore. I mean, I've said this many times that, nobody plays like Seve or Lee Trevino anymore. So how can the game be better?
Yeah, I think there's style points in there. I agree with most of that. I actually think, we want our children to be better than us. So through evolution, there should be. But sadly, we are in a generation now where we just give our kids more, right? We go, well, do we really want them to struggle? No, okay, here's another $1,000 sort of thing, or here's a new car. So, or a new cell phone. So sadly, we don't, like if heaven forbid now you give hardship to your children to make them stronger. I mean, your social welfare will take them away from you.
Yes.
So, we're in this really, really weird spot. We love everybody and we hate everybody at the same time. The country that was great 10 years ago is now our enemy and all sorts of, I mean, it's a really weird place that we're in now. And, but just going back to that, you're right. I would argue Tiger Woods would have won more.
Much more, yeah.
So he was disadvantaged, because it was a way for others to catch up. I mean, I've never been more obliterated on a golf course by any other player than like playing alongside Tiger Woods. It's like Seve. I remember Seve hitting a bunker shot on the 18th hole, the downhill par 3 at the Lancome. And, it's like the Friday round. And he had a guy called Max Cunningham actually was caddying from that.
Yeah, he's one of your countrymen.
Yeah. And, he was short-sighted himself. So he had, bugger all green. He had a 56-degree wedge, and I'm like, I know he's good, but he got nothing here. And this thing came out just like cotton wool, and it just ran. If it didn't go in, it was going to miss by an inch or so, and he holed it. And the scary thing about it, he wasn't sort of overly shocked. And then the greatest compliment I can give to that, we're playing at Augusta when they changed to threesomes the first 2 days. And I'm playing with Tom Watson and Ballesteros. And the second hole, the par 5, I can't remember. It's Thursday or Friday, to be honest. But Seve hits his, and I don't know if it's his second or his third shot, long left on the second. And the pin is back left, which is ferociously fast. It's downhill. Augusta had started cutting the grass in the other direction. So basically he's got nothing. He's about 15 feet over the back, and he's got about 8 feet of green. He's got nothing. And he's actually got to be really careful. This thing's going to go all the way off the green and down the other side. So there I am playing, with two people that I idolized, Watson, and Watson's a pretty good chipper in his day. So Seve gets up and he's fluffing around and he's picking up a sand on, then he's picking up an 8 on and whatever. And I'm like, you got nothing. What did you get? And he hits this shot. It takes like 2 bounces, and it's done with, it probably was like he hooded in a little sand on. This thing limped on the green. And you could read its number, and it's rolling. And I don't even know how you can get a ball to nearly stop and roll. And the thing went in, right? So I'm in the middle of the green, 25, 30 feet away from the flag, as is Tom Watson. And he just turns to me, as only a great player could say to another great player. And he said, you know the the scariest thing about that is that's exactly what he was trying to do. And that was the greatest compliment. And I just fear that some of these amazing players today, they are, and Rory's in full flight is just a beautiful player. And they have a place in golf's annals of great players. They really deserve that spot. But I don't want people to say, oh, that's because they use such and such, or that's because they use such and such. I was watching some old Ayrton Senna stuff. I loved Ayrton Senna. And when they used to have a gearbox, where they had a gearbox, they changed gears and the clutch and all that. And the Verstappens and the Hamiltons, I mean, they're tremendous today and that. But you hear the comparisons, oh, well, the cars are different. They don't have to do that. And it's a shame. Golf is still a great game. And so we've got to somehow restore the balance so that, in a weird way, the players aren't criticised for supposedly having less talent when they do. They practice like hell.
I've never argued
and some
that.
of the shots, it's
crazy.
Yeah. But that's, you try and tell that to the players themselves. They think it's an insult. I said, no, dude, I'm actually on your side. I want people to realise how good that shot actually was. But people will just think, oh, that was a utility class. You just got it up, or hey, that's, you don't carry a 3-iron or whatever, or, like it's just the club that did the work,
But that was certainly, it is the case sometimes. I mean, my Seve story, or one of my Seve stories is that I did a column years ago lamenting that, as you just mentioned, that he could do things with a 54-degree wedge that nobody else could do, basically. But then the 60-degree wedge and 62 or whatever came along, and it gave lesser gifted guys the ability to hit the shots that only Seve could hit. And that took away some of his edge. Yeah. The equipment did. And it was nothing to do with talent. That was the equipment allowing people to hit shots that they had no business hitting, really, that only he could hit, probably. And he agreed with me.
Yeah, well, as he should. He could do. I remember Mike Clayton going back to when I first started in Europe. I think it was the Scandinavian Masters, and we went out and we watched. There's a par 3, and it was blowing a gale. There's water left of the screen, and everybody was trying to hit it across the water, and it was getting blown to the right. They'd missed the green by 30 yards. I mean, it was a really windy day. And Seve got up there, and he's mucking around on the tee, and it was the second time I'd ever seen him live. The first time, I'd already played in the morning, was actually at Royal Melbourne, and he hit some incredible shots there. But anyway, so he's standing on the tee, and I'm like, this is straight, it's a par 3 straight over the water, right? I mean, there's nothing to it. Now, there was a little bit of grass and that round the right side. So it's almost a crescent-shaped fairway to get to the green. But, it's a par 3, so you don't even look at that. Anyways, mucking around on finally, it's like a 6-iron or whatever, but he finally pulls out like a 4-iron, and he hits a low hook, almost following the fairway line back into the breeze. And I'm like, I don't even know how you could see that shot. And then, I mean, yes, we used to play some practice rounds at Augusta. We'd play the 9-hole course for a bottle of wine. But we're playing a practice round on the proper course, and we get to 16, and he wants to skip it, but he wants to skip it left-handed, and he skipped it left-handed across the water. And I'm like, I just looked at him like, no, I'm not doing that. I can't do it. Yeah, when you see shots like that, it's like, the Tiger Woods Hazeltine shot, the 9th hole. I remember I was quite pally with Ernie Els in those days. He was living in the same community I'm in now, and Ernie was playing with him. And they were vying for number 1 in the world, and he goes, "This is the greatest shot I've ever seen." So those are the comparisons you want to have, and that's not because of a number on the bottom of the club.
No, I mean the last example that I can think of that was Tiger at the last President's Cup at Royal Melbourne. Mike Clayton and I walked around watching Tiger play that golf course. Tiger Woods was by a mile the best player on either side, because he knew how to play it, and he had all the shots that required of such a wonderful course. But the rest of them were playing the normal game in comparison to him. But it was a beautiful thing to watch, and I'm glad I saw it, especially given what's happened since. I mean, we might never see Tiger playing at that level again, given his injuries, but oh my goodness, it was an education to watch him, how he played that golf course. That particular golf course brought out the best in him.
Yeah, sadly, there's a touch of Van Gogh in him, isn't there? Where he's going to hurt himself, and as he's done. But I guess when you're that brilliant and that good, but there's just too many things that when you look back and you you want people to. There's so many people that he got into the game. Like he's a legitimate star.
Oh, yeah.
Golf. Even when you talk about the game, the growth of the game, used to be Hollywood around the world, whether it was Sean Connery or the Bing Crosbys of the world, that really were making golf famous. So if an A-lister star went and played golf, more people thought, oh, what a really good game. And then, they would have the Pebble Beach type events and all that. And the talk was really about who's playing, not the professionals. And Tiger Woods, Norman, made a big deal, obviously a big name and all that. But Arnold Palmer was probably the closest thing. And then Seve really didn't play those type of events. But it wasn't until Tiger Woods came along and played that you started to see that the golfer themselves could actually be the star, the real legitimate star. And the Michael Jordans started talking about golf, and the Steph Currys, and, the motor racing drivers play golf, and they all talk about Tiger Woods, and, Nadal plays golf, and, like that, because, it's Tiger Woods. So golf had a legitimate star that not only earned a tremendous amount of money, but drew people into the game. And that, I don't know, sadly, we've got on the coattails of the growth that wasn't necessarily generated by the game itself and the direction we were heading. We got on the coattails of one player who was fantastic and was a star.
He was the first golfer who's ever been the most famous sportsman on the planet, and it'll be a long time, I think, before another golfer gets to that title. The old phrase, he transcended the game. I mean, everybody, my grandmother knew who Tiger Woods was. Everybody knew who he was. He was Muhammad Ali and Michael Jordan. And I always think when people mention Michael Jordan, somebody once said to me that the basketball couldn't pay Michael Jordan enough. And golf was like that with Tiger. I never cared how much Tiger was getting for appearance money, because it wasn't enough. You couldn't pay Tiger Woods enough money to play in your tournament.
But sadly, that's what's creating the problem now. We're trying to sell a game to people on the growth that was developed by a player who's probably no longer going to be, or we're going to get access to. So to me, that's not a good deal,
No, well, I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but his value to the game was such that you literally couldn't pay him enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. I used to get on the coattails of some of the guys' parents' monies with IMG. You go out to Asia, and then you get to play, and you get some money there because you were, fifth or sixth or seventh or eighth down on that list. And I remember Greg Norman was the number one player in the world. Faldo was there. Curtis Strange was there, because I remember the hotel where we're staying, and we'd go on the top floor and get a helicopter to the golf course. That sounds pretty, I don't do that these days anymore. And Woods was there, and Woods had not won the Masters. And he was the biggest draw because, you were going to a place like Asia, and a lot of the people thought, well, hey, he looks sort of like us. And he was very clever there with the, what was the word he used, Kabbalah Asian, or the type of person he was. And but it allowed people to identify with him. And also he was new. It wasn't, nobody knew what he was going to develop into. So there was a newness about it that was, they just lined the field. I never forget the opening tee shot. They were just lined like 10 deep down both sides. I'm like, this kid hasn't even won a major yet. And then lo and behold, the 5 minutes later he wins Augusta, and it's, we're all wrong. But phenomenal ride. Yeah. But he's, and he traveled.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Frank, we kind of touched on the President's Cup a minute ago. It'd be remiss of me not to talk to you a little bit about the President's Cup. You've got, along with your teammates in 1998, you've still got the honour of being a member of the only international team to win that thing. Does that fact surprise you? And then we'll get into talking a little bit about Royal Melbourne 98.
In retrospect now, no, because if I go back to, the President's Cup started in 1994. Oddly enough, we mentioned Ernie, who won the US Open. Ernie did not play in that one. He honoured it. He played the Dunhill Cup, which the format had changed then. And so he represented his good friend Johan Rupert. And also he didn't know what the event was going to be like. But from 96 on, we had Ernie Els got to number one in the world. Greg Norman obviously had more weeks than anybody else prior to Tiger Woods. Nick Price, Vijay Singh. We had our equivalent of really the biggest difference in Europe's Ryder Cup thing when you had the big five. So we had a nucleus that was every bit as strong, if not stronger, than the American nucleus. And, I'm still a great believer, whether it's Ryder Cup or President's Cup, the best players have to do their job, because you can't expect the tail. The tail are not the strongest players. You can't expect them to do the damage. If they do, it's a bonus. But you have to go strength against strength. So we had, in retrospect, top heavy, and we haven't had it since. So, as you can't replace another Greg Norman, or you can't replace another Vijay Singh or Ernie Els and that. And until they do, they will struggle. So, the international side, which also, I know people have talked about it, the fact that it's tough to get people together, but I don't know, I've changed my mind on that. When I played in there in 1998, which was the only one we won, the MVP, in my opinion, was Carlos Franco, who didn't necessarily have a great record, but he created that camaraderie. And I think Europe's done that. I think Europe has every reason to have the problems that America said it had. Tough to get a team to go together. Well, you've got the same country, right? Same flag. Europe, for some reason, because of its tour, embraced their differences. Sevi and Nick they grew up as adversaries. And yet for a team, somehow they had a common cause. And the international team, we say the same thing. We're like, oh, well, we've got to get together. But we hadn't. And we narrowly lost by a point in 1996. And that's the reason why we won in 1998, is because that team was basically unchanged. And we'd changed a captain. There was some bad blood, all sorts of things. And so we felt like we had unfinished business. And we were like a really good boxer that was worthy of a rematch, that we're going to be better trained, better prepared. And we had a golf course that most of us knew. Ernie Els had the course record there. Greg Norman could play it backwards, so yeah, we were ready.
You were picked by Peter Thompson alongside Greg Turner. And that partnership turned out to be, you did rather well. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, we got day one. It was a weird one. I was inside the top 10, and then I was getting ready for the PGA Championship in 1998, and I got struck over my left eye by a golf ball at the golf course where I live at Lake Nona. I had 30 stitches, so it damaged the orbit of my eye, and I didn't really play. So I started dropping down, and Peter Thompson really had every right to go, well, I don't know if you're fit or not or whatever. But so he gave me a pick, and then he picked Greg as well, and because we'd played so many World Cups and Dunhill Cups together, he threw us together as a foursomes lineup. And foursomes, I've always thought, I've enjoyed it the most, but it's the hardest format. So he decided that we were going to go against, we were going to go together, and we got drawn against, in 1998, Mark O'Meara and David Duval, who were pretty damn good. David had got to number one, and O'Meara had won two majors. So I remember Jimmy Roberts. To this day, it was like a little prank. He made me say it in a speech we were both at once. He said that, we don't have a chance. And to be honest, if I was doing my job now, I'd say the same thing. So I hadn't heard the remark, but we win. I help wrong club Greg, and he hits it about 40 feet past, and Duval hits it to 2 feet. We were one up. So it looks like it's going to be half. And I make a 40-footer coming down the hill. And I think I nearly broke Greg's arm when I tried to high-five him. And then on our way to the media center, we were the first cab off the rank, and someone had told me, they go, that'll teach Jimmy Roberts. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, he said you guys didn't have a chance. So, you got to have a story when you go into the media center. And I try to tell some of the younger guys today the same thing. Patrick Cantley, actually, we had a big conversation on that once. And, you can always say drive 6 on 40-foot putt, but it's not a really good story, right? So I'm like, well, So I proceeded to do what everybody else should do. I lie. And I say, I heard what Jimmy said. Then I said, I heard what, one of the American commentators had said about, Greg Turner and myself, that we had no chance to win today. So I said, the team, they got together and just said, prove them wrong, show them. I said a few other things, obviously. And then they said, well, who is it? And I didn't know who it was at that stage. And anyway, and I'm like, well, I don't really want to get into that right now. It's personal, so I just elaborated and made it worse. And I still wasn't fully fit, so I didn't play in the afternoon. And Jimmy came up to apologize. And I was by the side of the fairway, and Ernie Els was playing with Vijay Singh and four-ball, better ball. And Ernie was about to take the club back. And Jimmy was about to say sorry. And I went, just hang on a minute, Jimmy, just let him play first, please. So now I've iced him as well. And so he thought we got over this really, 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 bad relationship. And I sort of let it play out for the rest of things. So we had this really antsy, while the American media is dissing us, we've got no everybody thinks, we're whitewashed, we're terrible. And so we let that whole narrative play out. So fast forward, I completely forget about it. Now I'm doing TV. It's 10, 15 years later. And we're doing a function at Bay Hill. And Jimmy, NBC Golf Channel in those days. Well, NBC had the weekend, Golf Channel Thursday, Friday. So it was Kelly Tillman, Jimmy Roberts, and myself. And so someone's talking about the story. And Jimmy had heard about it, and Jimmy, we're just about to go on the stage. And so Jimmy goes, I just want to, presidents come. I said, what are you talking about, Jimmy? So he rekindles the story. And I said, Jimmy, that was bull. I didn't even know. That was just bull, really. I had no idea. And he goes, what? So I tell him the story. I said, look, hey, we're just clamoring for something. So anyway, I forget about it. We go up on stage, and somebody asks me a question, and Jimmy interrupts and goes, now, hang on a minute. I'm going to ask him a question. And he proceeds, because he wants it off his chest. So he proceeds to do the whole story about the President's Cup. Yeah. So I just said, it was just things that you do to try and motivate yourself. So I've apologized about 6 times for it, but yeah. So, but it was great. It was to be part of a team. When I was a kid, I said I played a lot of other sports and team sports. I loved rugby league, and that to be part of a team is something special. Golf is this great game that had got me through a tough time in my life and given me everything I'd got. But to play alongside 11 others, and oddly enough, working with Nick Faldo, we've talked a lot about that. Like in a weird way, it gives you back balance as a person when you realize that people are so important in your life in the biggest moments. And I'll always remember that.
Callaway's new Rogue ST drivers represent a breakthrough in driver performance. The Rogue ST drivers are Callaway's fastest, most stable drivers ever. Callaway's industry-leading innovations, including their tungsten speed cartridge, jailbreak speed frame, and an AI-designed flash face, are engineered for maximum speed with exceptional levels of forgiveness. Think speed? Go Rogue with Callaway, the kings of distance. To find out which Rogue ST driver is right for you, visit callawaygolf.com.au.
Frank, the people listening to this will be wondering why the hell I haven't asked you anything about your broadcasting, or not too much anyway. And the question that keeps coming up is, what's his relationship like with Brandel Chamblee? So there you go. First question.
Fair enough. Yeah, it started off different. I played a lot with Brandel. Not a lot, actually. A little bit when I came across. Never had a problem on the golf course. And then we started off at the Golf Channel at the same time. He had already worked for ABC, tried out. He'll admit to it, didn't really work out. He struggled more with live golf. So, as luck would have it, I always felt like I was robbed and out of the game of golf. Meanwhile, I joined Golf Channel, which is a fledgling network in those days. And it's about to start a brand new show that year, which is called Live From. And it was a chance to have people work together. And to be honest, early on, we had a lot of fun. There was a Beat Brandel segment. We weren't they couldn't afford to travel to a lot of them, like the Augusta. So Brandel would be put in a dome, and I don't know if you know a guy called Reed Burton. He would be asking the viewers questions, see if you got 10 questions, see if you could stump Brandel. So we had a lot of fun. And then it just changed. There was some new leadership came in, and I think, and I'd like to think Brandel would admit, he changed his style a little bit and became a little more rambunctious. And also as to say the least, the more I got into it, the more I wanted to do live golf. So I was still doing live golf. We were both doing the Champions Tour at the same time. So I was working with Jim Kelly, who's still a friend to this day, and Brandel was working with Rich Lerner, who works with today. So they were the two teams for the Champions Tour. That was we had that and the buy.com in those days. And Keith Hirschland was the producer. So I learned a lot off Keith, and to this day too, every now and again I'll ask him a few questions TV related. So I felt my mind was, my unfinished business was still with golf. So I still wanted to see it from a golf point of view. And then to credit Brandel, he went in a different direction, which was analytics, basically. ShotLink was also starting up, and he went down the ShotLink train, which was great when we were working together. So I'd go to the range and get a different perspective, and he would look at shot link and come up with something different. And therefore, just by the nature of that, we would often naturally finish up in disagreement, which, and a lot of it was well-formed arguments as far as I was concerned. And to me, as long as the viewer was left thinking or maybe they learned something, I was okay with that. To me, it wasn't about, scoring a point or whatever. And it just developed from that. But, it's a show I'm really proud of, the people that worked on it. And I was lucky enough to be part of that. And then, I developed an area called tee to greens. I'd go out to the golf course. So to me, when we were doing a show, I felt like I would give him more time, for example, because if they were going to run a tee to green segment, I was getting 2 or 3 minutes here as well. But it was tougher when they changed the set to 4 and David Duval, because there just seemed to be more, I don't know, there was more bad blood. And sadly, I think the show was worse for it. But Brandel's work ethic, even to this day, is great. I like that. I just didn't like when we call it a hijack in TV, if someone deliberately goes out and tries to, when you prepare, if you're going to talk about Tiger Woods, so then someone turns it in another direction. So every now and again there was things like that, and that's where things would go down, an ugly rabbit hole. But yeah, I was proud of the show, and I was proud of a lot of the things we're doing. So to be honest, we didn't eat together a lot. I didn't think we had to, and Brandel would say the same, but if he was on his game and I was on my game, it was a show that I enjoyed, and we really, I thought we put a lot into it. When we're off our game, or if it got contentious and over the line, I always left with a bad feeling when it hit those moments. And there got to be a few more of those, sadly, yeah. But I still have more good memories.
Well, you're not alone, Frank. I'm a very proud, and I don't think I'm far from alone in this. That I've been long time blocked on Twitter by Brandel, so he doesn't really react well to a contrary point of view, put it that way.
Yeah, I love. He is like his family, his brother is a very good lawyer, and I love it. As you do, your articles are provocative. I know Eamon Lynch also does a great job. I think when people make you think, it's a bit like we're staying at the top of the show, whether it's about Saudi. I don't think we can just disregard things. No idea is a bad idea. At least look at it, and maybe it sheds more light. So when I would go into a show, and he would present a different a different take on it, for me, I'm like, okay, I'll have a little think of that. We'd go to commercial or whatever. And sometimes it allowed me to go to a different area or see it differently or explain it differently. And oddly enough, but live golf to me was always where I wanted to go, be part of it, because unfinished. So it was tough doing both together. And then I'd think at times when, if you think the show's becoming more about arguments and people getting closer and closer to that, and more about doing the right thing. And also I remember, sadly with those type of shows, you can say one thing on a Monday and say the exact opposite on a Tuesday. And the viewer often doesn't recollect that. And I think that's doing them a disservice.
Yeah, I mean, how do you view yourself now? I asked this because I spent a fair bit of time talking to Peter Allis, who's no longer with us. And Peter Allis was certainly a great ball striker and a wonderful player for a long time, till he got the yips, which his stories about the yips were great fun, at least to listen to. But he's thought of himself as a broadcaster. He stopped thinking of himself as a player, and that made him a better broadcaster. He wasn't out there thinking of himself as still part of the gang, if you like. How do you view that? I mean, it's a kind of tightrope that you have to walk, isn't it, as a former player?
Yeah, I think Peter got it right. I was lucky enough to work alongside with him. Actually, the Open Championship at St Andrews, where Zach Johnson won, was the last time we worked together. And he's a good influence on my career. He was allowed. I've got to be careful how I say this, only because he was allowed to have that perspective because of the time he came through. I mean, he has the disdain for social media. I also have that in my job for that, because I think what is happening now too, whether it's mental health, which we can conveniently use that phrase if we want to, or it's legit with a lot of people. So we're in this world now where, it's likes and clicks and all sorts of things. So, Peter was anything other than that. Peter, I remember, giving it that, I'd just come over, I'd done American TV, and I'd gone through this phase where it's a fantastic shot and it's great, and it's marvelous, and it's all that sort of thing. It's running out of superlatives, and they would not always put Peter and I together. The BBC would do like 45-minute stints. So you'd work in rotation. Then Peter and I we'd get like a good time during the day. And I'd do Golf Channel in the evening. And it was Garcia, and Garcia had hit a shot or whatever it is. And I'm trying to think of the golf course. He missed it left away from the out of bounds. And I was like, just off the green. He goes, and then Peter just looked at me. That was a poor shot. Disgusting from the Spaniard sort of thing. And it was, and he gave me a wry smile too, but it's like he got the temperature of an event so well in the moment, and he created a rhythm that sadly is lacking in a lot of broadcasts. But he had tenure, so he could disagree and get away with it with producers and the like. And I think sadly we are in this industry where the more we become a servant to it, whether it's the PGA Tour or the European Tour or a sponsor or whatever, then we do become less objective. There is a place for the greats. Bill McLaren in rugby was the greatest rugby commentator I ever listened to. I read his autobiography, and Richie Benaud, in my opinion, Australian, was the greatest cricket commentator. And I have on my phone, which I gave to Jim Nance. It's when he was trying to help Tony Romo. It's Richie's announcing laws, and they're brilliant. You should research them.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
And they're all trained by the BBC. Yeah, they're trained by the BBC. And I remember talking to Peter about it, and Peter said when he trained, and he was the same as Richie. He was in his early 30s. He could still play, but they didn't earn as much money. So he was offered a job by the BBC, and he thought, oh, great, I'm going to call golf. And they go, well, no, you're going to go in this little cabin here, and you're going to learn. And he would have a producer hanging over him, and no, you don't do that. That's terrible. Look, the cameras is and all this sort of business. And then finally he was allowed to actually go and do a tournament, and this guy came with him, like training wheels. And then one day the guy wasn't there. So they were trained properly. And I think what's happening a lot now is that people just in TV, they want a magical ex-player to be brilliant. And we haven't studied the various languages the same way that you have, whatever people are fluent in, whether Spanish is their natural language or, whatever, China, you name it. I mean, we're all different when we grow up. So you're just going to be thrown in this genre, and you've got to be, I don't know, prophetic and marvelous and all sorts of things with no training on when you should talk and when not. Whereas the best were actually trained. And oddly enough, I had this conversation with Jim Nance when they were getting ready with Tony Romo. And I passed on that. He was curious, and we had a couple of conversations. And Jim would fly in on a Monday, I think it was, after the tournament, and Tony just didn't do a broadcast. I mean, they spent 3 or 4 months with him. So he was actually trying to get, because they wanted more of him. So where you fit in, I think, from the Ellises and that is the more you can be you, which I know is really easy to say, but hard to be, where as honest as possible without fear of somebody writing something on Twitter. That's why I don't like, we all want to be liked. So you think, oh, was that good? And someone goes, oh, that's the dumbest statement I've ever heard. So that makes you go back into a shell, or they don't get what you're saying, or that's their favorite player. Like, look at the motor race in the weekend. You got Lewis Hamilton fans on one side and Max Verstappen fans on the other. I mean, that's quintessential sport, isn't it? They both can't be right, and they both can't be wrong. So, and that's what you want. If it's a really good sporting event, the Johnny Millerism, 50% of the people should hate you and 50% of the people should like you. But no broadcaster wants to be hated by 50% of the people. So you've got to get beyond that. And I think that's where Peter had found that sweet spot. And I actually think he got, I'm not going to say he got better as he got older, but there was a period of time, probably within 3 or 4 years before he stopped, where he was just brilliant.
Do you share my view that there would be a market out there for uncensored commentary? People would pay money to listen to exactly what you think?
Yeah, but what's your definition of uncensored? I know you said exactly what you think. What's your definition? You swear, or you?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe would draw the line at that. I think it's unnecessary. It's lazy if you have to use curse words. But I do know. I mean, it frustrates me a little bit when I know people like yourself. I mean, terrific knowledge of the game and all the rest of it. And maybe it's a time thing on television because it's all sound bites to an extent when you're certainly when you're commentating.
Correct.
But it's frustrating to me knowing the people, certainly the lads on Sky, I know really well. I mean, they don't get the opportunity to show how much they know about the subject, or very rarely. And that's a frustration to me. I think that the television falls short in that respect.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, television's a visual media. I know that's stating the obvious, but I remember Keith Hirschland telling me that first and foremost. And then to go back to Peter Ellis, when I talked to him about broadcasting, and I said, well, what do you think the problems are with the European or the American broadcast? Obviously, I was more interested in where I work right now. And he told me, he says, you know what I think? And he wasn't trying to be hypercritical. He said, often they put the spaces in the wrong places.
Mm.
And if you really listen to a broadcast, and I go back to Keith Hirschland, who I've already mentioned, if you and I were to play golf, and you're about to tee off first hole at Sunningdale, and I have my cell phone here, and I pick it up, and I start talking to a friend while you're teeing off, you would think I'm the rudest guy in the world, justifiably so. And sometimes announcing is like that. So, well, why would you talk in the middle of somebody's swing? I know, you're not out there right next to them, but if you actually look at the way the game's played, and I remember Keith telling me, and I mean, it was as early on in my career, he said, if you've got something more important than the shot being hit, you should get another job.
Mm.
And I promise you, I've written that down. It's on my phone, and it's so true. Hey, have I broken it? Yes, I have. But you have to respect the shot. But now, there's so many stats. I go back to whether it's live from. So here's John Huggan on the second, and now we're putting up your driving accuracy and what you shot yesterday and all this, and how many times you've had a 2-shot lead into Sunday. So by the time we get onto the hole, and maybe it's the hardest hole on the golf course, or the wind's changed, there's water there, and you desperately want to get in, this is a key hole for John Huggan.
Mm.
And you don't get it in, and you invariably hit it out of bounds or hit it in the lake, and it costs you the tournament. Someone thinks I'm a right prat because I never got it out. Like, well, why didn't you tell the viewer? And I'm like, well, we got a stat, and we got this, and we got that. So I'm not trying to blame the producer, but there's so many things where people want to show you what we can do to help. But in the end, to quote a Peter House, it's still a golf tournament. So when you, as an announcer, what I've learned to do, sadly, I really want to tell people this second hole is key. But I have to make a choice, and John Huggan has just teed it up, and he deserves space. So you let and maybe it's my hole, and so you have a conscious decision to say nothing because your shot's important.
Yeah, I mean, too often though,
and that's not always done now.
Yeah, I get the feeling that there's somebody, as you just kind of have touched on, that there's somebody behind the commentator pulling them back, restraining them from giving us everything that they think. I mean, I won't share the name of this person. I'll tell you afterwards if you like, but a very well-known commentator I bumped into at the end of a working day at a tournament, in a car park at a tournament. And he said to me, oh, well, said nothing, kept my job, which I thought was the most appalling statement I'd ever heard. And I'm sure that's not that's the exception rather than the norm, but there is some of that. I mean, that kind of leads me into the frustration that I feel sometimes, is that I don't feel like I'm getting everything that the player or that the commentator knows about the subject, and it's frustrating for me.
There's a flip side of that. It's frustrating for a broadcaster, but if you just turn the sound off, right? If you turn the sound off, and I'm not advocating for people to necessarily do it, but if you start with no sound and you go, okay, we've got a tournament, we've got an Open Championship being played, or the Masters, and they stand on the first tee and you see it, and you go, okay, well, what do you really want? Well, I'd like to hear the hit.
Mm.
Okay, so we're going to put the sound on the hit, and what else would you like? And then you go, okay, well, it'd be nice if they could tell me about the hole. So you started to reintroduce it, but the problem is you've got, through the years, you've got people like David Ferrity that were brilliant. A good David Ferrity was brilliant.
Mm.
And you've got, but you needed a good foil, which was, for him, it was Gary McCord. They were tremendous together. When you split them apart, they weren't the same. Johnny Miller was tremendous. It worked so well with Dan Hicks because Johnny Miller was so erudite. It created enormous gaps for everybody else. It's different now with Paul Azinger because Paul speaks more like an analyst type guy on the TV. So, he will use twice as twice the amount of words that a Johnny would. But if Johnny would leave it hanging out there, so then it was up to Dan Hicks to go in amongst the time they had. Do you just leave it hanging out there, or Johnny, did you really mean that? So you had space. Peter Ellis was, once again, going back to that, he would create space. So he would almost grab the microphone, and the BBC has a really good way of doing it, to be honest. And the European way, they use what's called lip mics, so you put them down and you pick them up. They're not just like a normal boom mic. So when you pick them up, they activate. So if I'm holding my mic, it means that I'm about to talk, so nobody else is going to talk. And when I put it down, somebody else can. So what I learned with Peter, when it was really important, he would grab his mic. And it wasn't just to say, hey, I've got the stage. He was controlling, whether we knew it or what at the time, the rhythm of the show. He knew it was such an important time that less had to be said, not more. So now maybe the reaction was going to be afterwards, and he would turn to me and ask a question, which was always, very poignant and always directed. So he created space even for me. But that took a guy that was at the top of his game. But I go back to all the other things that we want to put in the broadcast, which are they're analytics now. I was watching NFL on the weekend, and someone had gone for the extra point, where they have that play at the end and they try and do another touchdown, so it's 2 points rather than a conversion, which was 1. And anyway, they had a halftime show, and the guys proceeded to say, well, look, they're just looking at the pure analytics, and that's my problem with just using numbers. Like ShotLink is a great tool, and we all use it now. We can default to it. I can find out how many greens you hit and all that. But if you just say he has an 80% chance of hitting the fairway, was it really worth saying that? Was that important? So now we have to decide, rather than watch the screen and watch the player's mannerisms, or did he really hurt his wrist, we're getting caught up looking at another piece of apparatus, a laptop, on the numbers. So I think, to your point, we're getting dragged away from I'll finish with one more Peter Ellis story to sort of illustrate the point. There was a producer that was working with Peter for the very first time. And, they're looking in the booth there, and all the monitors, the TV monitors and the TV screens are there. And this young guy, who's a fairly prominent producer now, goes, Mr. Ellis, would you like to go and look at the golf course? I'll take you around and look at the flags. And Peter just completely didn't even respond, dissed him. And he goes, excuse me, Mr. Ellis. He goes, I heard you. He said, well, would you like to go? I'll take you around the golf course. He said, well, what would that do? He said, well, you can see where the pins are and where they have them, pins or hole locations. We can get into that as well. And we can show you that in the bunkers and all that. And he said, laddie, what's this thing in front of me? And he goes, oh, you mean the TV screen, the monitor? He goes, yeah, the monitor. He said, can you tell me what's going to be on that? And he goes, well, the show hasn't started yet. He said, right. He said, well, when you can, come back, and then I'll listen to you. And so basically, Peter was always guided by the picture.
Yeah.
So he either told you, Bill McLaren was the same way. They either told you what wasn't on the screen or what you might have missed. That's why they were great.
Yeah, I think Peter Ellis told me this story. He learned a lot from Henry Longhurst, way back in the day. And he told the story, which I've recounted many times. Brian Barnes is playing the road hole at St Andrews, and he's just short left in that horrible spot where you never want to be, and he's got a putt up over the ridge and near the bunker, and the pins behind the bunker. And Longhurst sets it up by saying that if he's not too careful here, he very well may putt into the bunker. Silence. So Barnes hits the putt. Sure enough, it goes up and back into the sand. There's a few more seconds of silence, and all Longhurst says is, well, there we are. And that's all that was needed, really.
Yes.
Perfect.
But, I do, but I've actually gone back over, I was trying to get ready for Augusta, because the way we do it with CBS, we have X holes. And when I first started to do TV, I was all more like the analyst, the golfer-minded thing. And now I have the luxury, the privilege to do part of Amen Corner, 11 and 12. But it's more of it's more of a host role, one that I was never really trained for, because it's more about painting pictures, which early on I always struggle with, to be honest. I was thinking more about the guy's grip and technique and the shot and the flag and very much golf. But then I realized, when they've made the turn and they go down 10 and they go down 11, it is beautiful pictures. And it's for some people, it's take a breath. For some people, it's get ready for the craziest ride they're ever going to have. For some, it's the first time they get to see water. There's all these things that happen there. Then there's, when it's a past champion, when they putt out an 11, there's going to be the famous walk up to the 12th tee with, as we say, patrons at Augusta, which they get, so it's laying out at the right moment for the appropriate applause, maybe picking something out, maybe, remembering their father's name, first got them into golf, and maybe what age they were when they first played as they're walking back, all those things, the Huggan Bridge, with 271 as scorecard written on it, 1953, that type of thing, and then go across the other side with the Nelson. So it's landmarks, a lot of what people know, but I struggle with it because I'm endeavoring to sound like an announcer, which I think that's where you go off kilter and get in trouble. And anyway, so I was scrambling to just trying to get ready for the Masters a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And, my favorite Masters is 1975. I was 15 and I was a Johnny Miller fan, and Wisecoff to this day, sadly, is still struggling, health-wise.
Yeah.
And Jack Nicklaus. I'd never heard Jack Nicklaus talk, but these are the top 3 guys in the world. So that was the one Masters I got to watch as a kid in New Zealand, and I couldn't remember who did the commentary, to be honest, at that particular time. But there I was seeing these players that I like, wow, wouldn't it be great to be like that and maybe play there one day? Anyway, so I'm getting ready for the Masters, and lo and behold, Vince Scully, who's arguably the most famous baseball voice, was part of the broadcast in 1975. So I started reading about Vince Scully getting ready, and Vince Scully described calling golf as a relay sport. And remember, this is when they weren't just blasting the pictures with, pro tracers and stats and all that. So it really was people that were trained for radio, because all these great voices that you've referred to learned in radio, really. Yeah. And
golf's great on the radio.
McLaren, same.
Sorry to interrupt.
It is.
Yeah.
Maureen, I love Maureen. I've worked with Maureen, but on the radio, she's fantastic. The way in which she describes a shot, I always make a mess of her surname, so I'm not even going to try. Maureen, yeah. And good lass, actually, but yes, that's it, yeah. And so anyway, I go back to Vince Scully. So I'm like, Vince Scully called the Masters? I'm like, he's a baseball guy. So I start doing some more research, and he's talking about Amy and Corner specifically in the sense of the sound. He said, it's a bit like a soup bowl. When a cannon goes off, it reverberates around the rim of the bowl. And that's what happens, especially in the corner of Amy and Corners. But all his words were very descriptive. And when you hear him in baseball, he would often, at times, if it was a specific moment where it looked like a record was going to be broken, or the equivalent of I don't know, one bowler getting all 10 wickets, he would, in amongst the commentary, put the date or the time, and it was little things that you don't notice till later on, and because you're realizing that we are earmarking time at a specific thing, as a Tiger Woods shot or whatever. So there's things that you try and glean from that going forward. But, CBS have given me a chance now to try and at least become a better broadcaster and develop that part, that hopefully I can, some of the things that I've learned from a lot of the people I've been lucky enough to work alongside, that you become a better you in translating that to the viewer. But yeah, it's different. So all our tools that we have now.
Sorry, I was just going to say, so you think of yourself more as a broadcaster than as a player now. Is that fair? Yeah,
I do.
Yeah, I mean, that makes, as I say, that just lends to my argument. I think the best two, certainly in my experience, were Peter Alliss and Johnny Miller. And to me, that was the first thing they did. They decided that they were broadcasters and not players anymore. And you've done the same thing. I think that's a good, you've got two good models there, I think.
Oh yeah, but you still need the information. Johnny would go to the range, and I think you can. I've had many a time. I've said something a player hasn't liked. I'm like, and that's not everybody will do it, and they'll go, here we go. So you go down to the range, and if somebody had, they call you over, you get the finger, and they come over here, and you get an earful or whatever, and then hopefully you try and say, well, look, if you had that shot again, is that what you'd want? And you move on, but you go. For example, if somebody misses the green, if a shot's horrible and they miss it in a tough spot, the up and down becomes that much more remarkable. But if it's just an average shot, they just pulled it to the left. It's sort of, it's a little off. And so therefore the up and downs, well, it's just a little, chip and a little putt, isn't it? So it becomes very sort of ordinary. Whereas, a poor shot for a top player is a poor shot and misses the green, but consequently too is the chance to redeem themselves. And I think sport's about that. Sport's about dropping a catch and then playing brilliantly the rest of the game.
Yeah.
It really is. And then he's become a man. You become a man the rest of the game. So, and I think you have to point that out. But sadly, that's one thing where I don't know of any tour really that in their annual general meetings invite the media to go and say, and maybe you don't have to, but just to go, this is exactly how it does go down. Believe it or not, as you know, when you write the article that's provocative, you've opened up a bunch of people's minds, made them think. A lot of people will take issue to it, but you've made them think, so you've actually done your job. But nobody credits you for making them think, so you've actually made them a better version themselves. So, you don't get a medal for it, but you've done your job.
Frank, that's a good place to stop. I think I've kept you for an hour and 45 minutes, believe it or not. It's gone very quickly, certainly on this end. I hope you feel the same. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a privilege to listening to you. I'm one of your biggest fans. I hate to tell you that, but it's true. And thanks for coming on.
No, Huggy, mate, you've always you got it right. I love the fact that you still believe it's a great game. I think it starts there. I love that you share your pain.
There's plenty of that.
No, but when people stop doing that, then we start making really big mistakes. So if things change for the better, it's because of people like you that never gave up.
Wow. So much to chew on from that chat, even just in those last couple of words from Frank Nobilo. When people stop loving the game, we start making really big mistakes. There's a sentiment both to consider and wholeheartedly agree with. Well, that was a hell of a way to kick off 2022, and I've got to say, a tough act to follow, but I think we might have just the tonic with our next episode, when we meet a woman who's on the path to becoming the first female course superintendent at Royal Melbourne.
Yeah, being a manager, I guess not only in greenkeeping, but, you've got to have authority, you've got to have empathy, there's so many different skills that you need to have, and women have just as many as men. So I can't see why not in the future that a woman could be a superintendent at any Sandbelt course or any, Sydney course or Pine Valley, Cypress Point, who knows, the old course. But I think, very much so nowadays, anything's within reach.
That's Jerry O'Callaghan, course superintendent at Sandringham Links, next time on The Thing About Golf.